Readings from Freedom's Embrace, a novel by Kate Greene. Part 1. A Young Woman of Colonial Philadelphia. Prologue. During the 18th century, Philadelphia was considered the Paris of the New World. It was the largest city in the 13 colonies before the Revolution. Only Boston and New York challenged it. While resistance to the British Empire started in the Northern Colonies, and especially the city of Boston, the idea of revolution was finally expounded in Philadelphia, which became the first capital of the new nation. That happened in 1776, when independence was declared. Our story starts nearly a generation before those momentous events. It is the start of the summer of 1754. Abigail Stuart is a new kind of woman. Well educated with strong opinions, she is just about too much for her father, Reverend Stuart, to handle. He plans to marry her well to old Dr. Stone. She is not at all happy about that. But all of the men her own age chasing after her are just not right, especially that Mr. Reynolds with his Virginia aristocratic airs. He is impossible. But fate continues to throw them together as the storms of revolution just begin to peek over the horizon. Whatever comes to be, though, fate intends them to face it together. Treason and freedom are both in the Philadelphia air. Even that lecherous esotericist, Dr. Ben Franklin, wanders by. Scene 1. Abigail's second-floor bedroom. Abigail awakening, internal monologue. Dear Mrs. Fitsum, more to me like a mother than a housekeeper, she always manages to calm my frayed nerves. Nothing seems quite right anymore, but why? What's the right word? Unsure, anxious, fidgety? No, 'tis simple boredom from this household's routine. Abigail gets up slowly, stretching away the stiffness of exhaustion and shaking away disturbing memories. Today 'tis sunny, but such spring mornings still tease of winter. Abigail pulls off her chemise and hurriedly opens a trunk at the foot of her bed. Carefully she extracts a set of linen undergarments and then reaches into a second trunk for two simple homespun round gowns to layer. Father considers wearing only one gown a sign of immodesty. There are Quakers who are not so strict as father. Must rub away any tear stains left as evidence of last night's distress. Such rage! I know father thinks of me as stubborn, but in the end I always seem to give in. Have I ever raged in protest of anything? And my tears are useless anyway. When father makes a decision, and now he's making the most important decision for my future happiness. What is he thinking now? He will certainly still be angry, but he's called me foolish and ungrateful. 'Tis unfair. The good Reverend Stuart thinks most women foolish and ungrateful. I cannot hope to be accepted. Perhaps if mother had lived, it would take far fewer pains to plan my whole life for me. It isn't that father thinks me still a child. 'Tis something more, something within him that makes him so demanding. Oh, yes, I could blame it on his faith and his determination to raise me a good Christian. He often reasons that for excuse, as if God had chosen him to judge me in his place. No, it isn't religion that made him so resolved in his ways. If only he would listen. Father, after all, said that I am too stubborn for my opinions to be considered in any matter of importance. Does he take his own preaching to heart? After all, doesn't he claim to believe in free will? Shouldn't I have the right to make my own choices? He watches me very closely. He likes it when I do as he does. There was that lecture on the superiority of currant cakes with tea that he pronounced at Mrs. Reynolds' afternoon prayer meeting when I chose a different sweet from his. I wondered how this could possibly be important to him, until finally I replaced the sweet I had chosen the one like his. Then, when I complimented The currant cake, he smiled and nodded, pleased at my acknowledgment. To echo him was to win his approval. When I think about my life and possible futures, my thoughts become hazy. There was that fidgety, unsure sensation again. Abigail was not really certain what she wanted in life, but since choices were then rarely given women to ponder, there was no use in dreaming of what could not be. With little practice making decisions, her life had passed obeying with little question, obeying that very person who now most vexed her. Mrs. Fixon preparing tonight's dinner. Am I to be the main course? Abigail quickly smooths the linen chemise she had pulled down over her head and adjusts the sleeves at her elbow. Then she covers it with the two homespun gowns, one over the other, and adjusts the ties under the waist. Drawing her long hair back, she pulls the thick mass over her head, dividing the braiding and braiding it tightly, and pinning it in a bun on top of her head. This she covers completely with a mob cap. To display one's own hair as would be immodest, according to father. In truth, I fear he worries that some still consider red hair the mark of a witch. Most of the people in Philadelphia are not that superstitious, but you never know really when someone might want to cause trouble and blame the Presbyterian minister's daughter as a witch. People still talk about the New England witches, though all that news was a century old. I wonder if anyone even knows the color of my hair. My sister Julia would laugh from her grand house in England. She would look at me and laugh. Her servants are better dressed than I, and they are not constantly reminded of God's impatience with vain, silly women. Abigail shakes her head and walks downstairs to the kitchen, and the smell of fresh cornbread. Freedom's embrace, Scene 2, the Stuarts' kitchen. Mrs. Fitsum. Well, you're late enough. Mrs. Fitsum reprimands sternly as Abby steals a sideways glance to see if she was really angry. Mrs. Fitsum chuckles and Abby relaxes. Abigail. Does a chicken rush to slaughter? Abby sits at the long table by the fire and reaches for a piece of cornbread. Abigail. I have been thinking. Julia has been married for about 8 years now, and her position in London in society is secure. Perhaps she would consider taking me under wing and helping me to escape this prison. At 20, I am not too old a spinster for society in England. Mrs. Fitsum, shocked and severe. Abigail, you mustn't say such things. Sometimes you truly speak like a spoilt, ungrateful child. Your father has worked hard to establish himself, and you live far better than most people in this town. Really, calling this place a prison? Such talk. Mrs. Fitsum bends over a mound of sticky bread dough and begins to slap and pound it with her fists, shaking her head all the while. The smell of yeast fills the room. Abigail, 'tis true I am spoilt, but I am not ungrateful. I simply want the right to choose my own husband, as Julia did. Oh, stop. Julia was chosen. She didn't choose. You spent too many years living with your Aunt Eleanor. God rest her soul, and was good for you. If your father had kept you here, you might be more appreciative. Abigail. Appreciative, Mrs. Fitsum. Father wants me to marry Dr. Stone. Old Dr. Stone. Why, he's older than father, and he has that odd smell about him, and he is ugly, and I don't like the way he leers at me. Mrs. Fitsum. Now, Abby, your father is simply trying to do his best by you, marrying you off to a wealthy man, though I must admit Dr. Stone is somewhat whiffy. Mrs. Fitsum frowns. He certainly does have an odd sort of odor about him. The last words are murmured to herself as though a question, and she appears disconcerted. She shakes her head and blinks back to the kitchen. Must be the cures he prescribes for his patients. Besides, Benjamin Stone is one of your father's closest friends. Mrs. Fitsum dusts the flour off her hands and looks hard at Abigail. You should have expected that he would choose one of his friends for you. He cares for their regard. Abigail. He cares more for them than he does for me. Mrs. Fitsum. Abigail, this is not England. You don't have Aunt Eleanor about for introductions, and there are no wealthy earls here with handsome second sons to marry off. Julia was very fortunate to have the beauty and character that attracted the sort of gentleman she was hoping for. Mrs. Fitsum turns to give Abigail a disapproving look, and up and down. Mrs. Fitsum. You, on the other hand, have a nasty temper, and you are not so finished as Julia, and you must settle for less than a husband. Abigail, her green eyes flashing gold. That is not fair. I am 6 years younger than Julia, and when she married at 18, I was but 12. How finished could I have been at 12? And then, 2 years later, when I was still too timid to feel any ease in society, Aunt Eleanor died, and I was whisked back here, where I have no chance to practice what little I learned. Father oversees everything I do and sees that I do very little. You know, sometimes I think he even knows my thoughts. Mrs. Fitsum, as she places the ball of dough in a clay bowl, smooths the top and covers it with a towel. I am certain that there are worse places you might be than here in Philadelphia, Abby. 'Tis the leading city of the colonies, and marriage here is for convenience, and if not for love. Julia did little good writing to you and filling your head with romantic notions, telling you how ecstatically happy she was. Besides, Mrs. Fitsum sits down and leans towards Abby. Yes, you are to marry Dr. Stone. He is one of the city's leading citizens and one of its richest. So what that he be old? Be thankful to get a rich husband, for if you marry poor, you shall never again know rest from work. Look at the women who marry poor. They toil from early morn till late at night, and when they die, they are forgotten as their husbands rush out to look for new wives to replace them at their labors. Mrs. Fitsum shakes her head and looks far across the room. Moments pass, and she continues softly. Yes, who can blame the husbands with so much to do? If your father wishes to spare you the pain of such a life, can you blame him? Abigail crumbles some dried tea leaves into a cup and gets up for the kettle of steaming water that always hung over the fire. Abigail. I would rather not marry at all than marry someone I loathed. Abigail pours the hot water over the leaves, returns the kettle to its post. I could teach or take care of someone's children, or just, I don't know, there must be something more. Abigail's voice fades, and she sits down, stirring the fragrant leaves into the water, and then watches them fall slowly to the bottom of the cup. Abigail whispering, Perhaps someone could read these for me and tell me if I shall know any future happiness. Mrs. Fitsum shakes her head. A fine thing for the daughter of one of Philadelphia's leading ministers to talk of fortunes. Watch out you aren't taking for a witch yourself with that wild red hair of yours. Abigail looks up and smiles. Do you think being thought a witch might frighten off Dr. Stone? She asked. Mrs. Fitsum. Not from the way he takes note of you. Abigail. What are father's plans for me? Did he tell you anything? Or is he still too angry to talk? Mrs. Fitsum. Your father is over at the church preparing Sunday's sermon. He told me not to waken you, but you know you are expected to clean and dust and rub down pews today. It is almost a year since they were last oiled. Mrs. Fitsum frowned. You were expected to be at the church with the early sun and have overslept by hours. But you can still get much accomplished if you get moving. Your father plans to have Dr. Stone over for dinner tonight, so that the doctors could properly propose, the wedding could be planned. Now, he is afeared that you may be rude and put the doctor off. Mind you, he has already given the doctor his approval, but he is anxious that if he brings the subject up before you get used to it, you might embarrass him and provoke the doctor to abandon his offer. He told me that he is putting off your answer to the doctor for a few days, and that he intends to invite Joshua Wilding and that teacher Wright over for dinner tonight, along with the doctor, so that the subject will not be broached. Of course,
You shall be expected to have dinner with him, but they won't expect you to stay for after-dinner talk. Oh, and Mr. Reynolds may be showing up as well. Abigail. Of course not. Abigail, internal monologue. Reverend Stuart considers himself rather enlightened because he encourages the thorough education of females. Yet he rarely acknowledges that accomplishment in conversation, but tonight I shall be grateful to be ignored. Mrs. Fitsam. You had better be moving if you intend to get anything done today. Abigail, blinking alert at Mrs. Fitsam's words, takes a quick sip of tea, stands up, reaches for an apron hanging from a peg on the wall. She ties it over her gowns and then takes up the long scarf Mrs. Fitsam hands her and drapes it over her shoulders. Internal monologue. A minister's daughter must always be well covered and modest, and so I look like a rag picker twice my age. Narrator. Abigail reaches for a small shoulder satchel that contains the dust cloths and the tin of homemade dark oily paste for the pews. Mrs. Fitsam hands her a second satchel containing some dried fruit, cornbread, and some salted dried meat. Mrs. Fitsam. So that you don't have to walk back with your father for midday lunch. Abigail, laughing. Thank you. I shall come back early to help with dinner. Perhaps by cooking will discourage Dr. Stone. Abigail exits. Mrs. Fitsam, her voice over the flashback. She frowns and shakes her head. But father and daughter are so very stubborn. No matter who should win this contest, there will be many unpleasantries, and who would have guessed it? When Abby returned from England years ago, she was sick for weeks from the long and disagreeable voyage, and the bad food she had eaten during same. She was undemanding, very shy and quiet, looking to her books for company. Mrs. Fitsam pauses with her thoughts. She attended her father's services regularly, and she was polite and even pleasant to those who took note of her, but she had not truly grown attached to any of them, perhaps because her father keeps such close scrutiny of her. But things are changing. Abigail is beginning to question everything, as though she has suddenly developed that sense of wonder and curiosity young children have before they are scolded to submission. And at the worst possible time, just when Reverend Stuart plans an advantageous union, Abigail is just not practical, and that is becoming apparent much too late for change. It had been a good marriage, I suppose. There was no arguing that we remained friends until his death. So, what was the more that Abigail spoke of? She read too many books. Scene 3. Abigail hurries out the back door and turns to take the path along the side of the house. She slips through the white picket gate in the front onto Chestnut Street. She takes a deep breath and smiles. There is that early spring smell of freshly turned dirt mixed with the sweetness of early blooms. Abigail looks back. Grandfather Stuart bought the property so many years ago, when building here by 5th Street was considered very daring. Forests lay beyond, and there were still occasional attacks from Indians and wild animals. But now the city has grown so much that buildings, though set apart, stretched beyond a few blocks further. Still, it would be nice if the paving reached this far. Abigail thought as she stepped gingerly onto the muddy street, lifting her skirts slightly to keep them clean, and walked quickly down Chestnut Street. "Good morning, Miss Stuart." Startled, Abigail collided with something, or a person. She blinks and finds herself looking up into the smiling eyes of Ethan Wright. Mr. Wright: "I'm sorry. I have interrupted some great thought. How very studious you appear, Miss Stuart. But of course, we know you ladies have your lady things to fill your minds." His eyes sparkle as he teases. Abigail politely smiles back at the teacher. I am on my way to the church. I'm expected to do some cleaning today. She wrinkles her nose at the thought, and Mr. Wright laughs. Mrs. Fitsam says that you are to dine with us tonight. She looks up at Mr. Wright, who acknowledges the invitation with a nod and then continues to speak as he turns to accompany her. Abigail, internal monologue. What of Mr. Wright? He isn't bad-looking. He is tall and appears strong, and he is sometimes pleasant, and he has a good and respected position as a teacher of classics. Would he make a good husband? Perhaps, but there is something in him that I do not like. He does make much of himself. He certainly is his own favorite person. Abigail suppresses a desire to giggle. Continues internal monologue. That tea at the Reynolds, where Mr. Wright first introduced himself and went on and on about the advantages of his own education as though boasting his superiority for it. Abigail purses her lips. I wonder if I dislike him as himself or because he is a friend of father. Mr. Wright aloud. Miss Stuart, are you well, Miss Stuart? I have been talking, but I am not sure you've been listening. I do hope you do not find my offerings tedious. Abigail startles, blinks her eyes, and looks blankly at Mr. Wright, mumbling, trying to gather her thoughts. I'm sorry, Mr. Wright. I did not hear. Perhaps the sun. Abigail shakes her head, seeking an excuse. She had not paid attention, and that was very rude. Mr. Wright appears vexed. Mr. Wright. My students have no trouble attending my words, even when my words are Greek or Latin, and I am most fluent in both those difficult tongues. Abigail could hear conceit in his voice and catches him frowning disapproval as he glances at her. Mr. Wright continues. I thought your father told me you were instructed in the classics, Miss Stuart. I do hope you paid your instructors more note than you did me, or your instruction must have suffered. Mr. Wright continues, enchanting by his own voice. You are a female, and so few are inclined to learning. He bestows an amused smile on Abigail that irritates her. She hides her feelings and smiles back, too, sweetly. Slowly and deliberately she answers. My instruction was mostly in books, and they paid me little heed. I have found that books rarely take offense when closed. She turns to look up 3rd Street and then turns back to face Mr. Wright. He had reddened at her words, and his brow furrowed. Abigail thinks to herself, I have bewildered him. He cannot tell whether I've insulted him or flattered him. Let him ponder that. Abigail out loud. I turn here for the church, Mr. Wright. I shall see you at dinner. Smiling, she quickly takes her leave. Mr. Wright, confused. Good day, Miss Stuart. Mr. Wright goes in his own direction. Abigail, internally. However, could I have considered him a possibility? Abigail shivers as if to shake off any link to Mr. Wright. But desperation at the thought of marrying Dr. Stone had her considering all alternatives. Abigail continuing monologue. Mr. Wright is rude and vain and would be impossible to live with. Besides, his interest is only in himself. That occasion when I caught him staring at me and it made me so very uncomfortable. She grimaced and brushed the thought away. Abigail aloud. He was probably staring in horror over something ignorant I may have said. Scene 4. Reverend Stuart's Church. 3rd Street was paved, and Abby enjoyed the clopping sound of horses' hooves against the stone. But even more, she liked those days when so many horses clopped along the street that the rumble of the carriages they pulled shook the roadway and sounded like thunder coming up through the ground. To disturb us, our complacency, Father would say. Abby liked the sense of daring that she felt walking through that roar. In earlier years, she would hold her head high and imagine herself a queen, leading her army forth to battle in some strange, exciting foreign place. And then she would turn a corner to a quieter road where the ground didn't tremble and the earth would settle, and Abby would realize herself once again the minister's daughter, now off to do battle with dust in the pulpit and cobwebs in the belfry. She sighed at her thoughts. By late morning, the roadway became more and more crowded with people going about their business, and Abby loved the bustle and the confusion they created, so different from the quiet of home. In the distance, the Market Street vendors were hawking their wares, their faces flushed and their voices hoarse from overuse. The smells of produce and exotic spices from the West Indies and from Europe filled the air. Abigail, internal monologue. It would be nice to stay and see what new items have come to the port. The commerce of the world comes to Philadelphia. But she knew better than to linger when her father was already angry with her, and besides, polishing church pews was not her favorite pastime. Abigail, thinking as she turns right and heads for the church, "'Tis best to get it done and quickly." Parked in front of the Presbyterian church was a large, elegant black carriage. Abigail, "The Guilford carriage." "Well, that is good because the Guilfords depend so much on Father's advice that they may stay the whole day. That would surely keep him too busy for me." She turned and ran up the steps to the plain oak doors and pulled back on the heavy iron bar to let herself into the tiny entrance hall. She passed through quickly, peering through the dim light and blinking her eyes to accustom them. Walking softly, so as not to be heard, Abby raised her head and sniffed the air. Why do churches always smell musty, even when they are well used? Her father would say that it was because Abby did not give enough time to dusting, but she thought not. Perhaps God wants his house to smell as if they have been standing for centuries instead of years, like great old cathedrals. Abigail made her way down the center aisle to the front row of the pews. Her father's study was in the corner to her right, so she decided to begin on the left side of the room. Abby removed her scarf and opened the jar of dark, sticky, oily paste. Carefully scooping some out on a folded rag, she squatted down on her knees and began to rub the concoction into the wood. As she worked the wood, Abby hummed, and the time passed quickly as she polished row after row of oaken pew. Soon Abby's back began to hurt and her knees were sore and her face was damp from the exertion. She brushed away the dampness from her skin with her sticky hands and realized her face must be splashed with the same color as the rag she rubbed with. "Ah, well, I shall say it is the latest in fashion, and I have made up my face so for Dr. Stone." But there were still rows to finish, and so she forgets her face and goes back to polishing the pews to a shine. The groan of the heavy front door as it opened startled Abby from her work. Abby fretting, "Oh, that might be Dr. Stone." Not wanting to be seen, she ducked down below the level of the seat she had been working on and listened to determine who was coming in. Footsteps echoed in the large open room, and the door groaned shut behind them. "It is a group," thought Abby, listening to the clatter of heels on plank floor. A single set of steps was coming from the direction of the study, and Abby tilted her head. That must be Mrs. Cobb. Mrs. Cobb calling out across the church. "Oh, Mrs. Reynolds, how good to see you and your fine family." Mrs. Reynolds replied, "And you, Miss Cobb. Is the Reverend Stuart about? I have such news for him." Abigail, internal. So it was Mrs. Reynolds. Father would be pleased. The Reynolds were one of Philadelphia's wealthiest families, most of whom were Quakers or Anglicans. Reverend Stuart did his very best to see that the few wealthy families who frequented his church were kept happy with the attentions they received. If Mrs. Reynolds has news for him, thought Abby, he may very well forget about me. Mrs. Cobb. Reverend Stuart is with the Gilbert family, planning the baptism of their infant son, and he has been advising them on the education of their older boys. He is so very knowledgeable. Mrs. Cobb. was a great admirer of Reverend Stuart. "They are just finishing up, if you would care to wait." Mrs. Reynolds. "That is fine," said Mrs. Reynolds. "We shall sit here and talk while we wait." Mrs. Cobb smiles, nods, and returns to the study. Abigail internally. "Bother! I must lie here until they go into his study, for I would seem a fool to stand up now." Abigail shifts her body for comfort, cupped her face in her oily paste-stained hands, and prepared for a long wait. Mrs. Reynolds talking to Nathaniel Reynolds. "The Reverend Stuart is from one of Philadelphia's oldest and most respected families, Nathaniel, or at least he married into it. I consider him a dear friend, and so does your uncle." Nathaniel Reynolds, voice strong and pleasant but affected, indicating boredom with the subject. "Yes, Father used to talk of him. He married a brunette, I believe." Mrs. Reynolds, ending by teasing. "Yes, the Burnett's made their money in lumber, sending enormous boatloads of it back to England, where it sold for plenty. They built a large, elegant home over by 5th Street, of all places, and held regular gatherings. We all used to go to them. Reverend Stuart showed up at one of those affairs, and the Barnetts took to him. He is very well educated and from a good family, and though he had a little money of his own back then, it was a trifling compared to the Burnett's fortune. Of course, here in Philadelphia, a minister is usually regarded and respected as a gentleman, no matter his background. But it is nice to know our ministers well bred. Of course, you Virginians only show respect for large landowners." Abigail internally stifling a giggle. Would they consider me well bred if they could see me lying here, spying on them? Thomas Reynolds, whining, "Mommy, I want to go home. I'm tired." Mrs. Reynolds, "Now, Thomas, we must introduce your cousin Nathaniel to Reverend Stuart, and we must tell the Reverend about our little festivity Saturday next. Do sit still anyway. Nathaniel, Reverend Stuart married the Burnett's only child, Penelope, and they had 2 daughters, Julia and Abigail. And when Abigail was just a toddler, Penelope caught a chill and died. The girls were sent to England to be educated by Reverend Stuart's sister, and she managed to marry the relations to an earl." Well, fascinating. "Now, Nathaniel, don't vex me. I want you to get to know Philadelphia's best families. It never hurts to have connections." Nathaniel, "Yes, Aunt, I do appreciate your efforts, but I am here for sport. Introduce me to beautiful young women who are anxious to be ruined, not to tottering spinsters and ministers' daughters determined to feed me cakes and tea." Mrs. Reynolds, "Oh my, you do say such terrible things, Nathaniel. I think you do it just to startle me. Well, I would introduce you to Reverend Stuart's daughter, Abigail. She is quite attractive in an exotic way with strangely colored eyes, and what they call them, witch eyes, green with bits of gold. But there was a rumor about that she is to marry Dr. Stone. I shall have to press the Reverend for gossip." Nathaniel laughing, "I don't fancy ruining the reputation of a minister's daughter anyway, Aunt Lydia, or fighting a duel over anyone." Mrs. Reynolds, "Well, I shall introduce you on Saturday to the Putnam twins, and you may have your choice. But you must be very nice to them, and a perfect gentleman, for their father is quite well off and respected in this town." Abby rolls over on her back and shivers in dread. Her hands go to her face, her fingers rubbing her forehead and eyelids and cheeks, adding more streaks to the oily paste stains already in place. But she fears over her impending marriage leaves her unaware of the mess that she was creating, and she's too horrified over what she's hearing to worry about how she might look. Internally, rumor about why to marry Dr. Stone? It is as though the deed is already done. I must do something to stop this marriage. A child whined. "She hit me! No, he kicked me! Thomas, Suzanne, you're in church. Do you want to make God angry? Do be quiet." A door creaks open somewhere. Abigail hears voices and footsteps. Well, good. The Guilford family is coming out. As soon as the Reynolds go in, I can slip out of here. Narrator. Abigail closes her eyes and buries her face in her hands. She tries to ignore the echo of greetings and footsteps and the swishing of fabrics in the big empty church. Finally, the front door gives up another groan and then falls into place. The Guilfords were gone. Holding her breath, Abigail peers up over the back of the pew in front of her and then giggles with relief. The room is empty. She would not be found out. Quietly, Abigail slips out of the row of pews and hastens up the aisle. A door opens somewhere and she quickens her pace without looking back. "Abigail! Abigail!" her father calls out. "Are you here at last? Do come to my study. Mrs. Reynolds is here." Abigail. "Oh, 'tis father, I am caught. At least they shan't know I heard their conversation, for they shall think I just came in." Abigail turns and walks stiffly back down the aisle and turns to her father's study just as the Reynolds party comes out. Reverend Stuart fussing melodiously. "Yes, Mrs. Reynolds, a gathering to honor Mr. Venezio would be perfectly respectable. After all, we must encourage those upon whom God has bestowed special talents. We would be happy to attend your affair, and I am sure that Dr. Stone will be most happy to attend also." Reverend Stuart smiles ingratiatingly at Mrs. Reynolds. Abby internally. So she is aware of his scheme, and now she knows it as more than rumor. I suppose I am to be the last informed of my wedding. Reverend Stuart smiling and turning towards Abigail. "Ah, yes, Abigail, my dear, the Reynolds are hosting a party to honor an artist." Mrs. Reynolds interrupting. "An Italian artist from Italy." Reverend Stuart. "Ah, yes, an Italian artist. He is to paint a family portrait of the Reynolds, Abigail, for future generations. And oh, how careless of me. Permit me to introduce Mr. Nathaniel Reynolds, Mrs. Reynolds' nephew from Virginia. Mr. Reynolds, my daughter, Abigail." Mr. Reynolds, standing in shadow behind the group, steps forward. Reverend Stuart turns to look at his daughter. He stares and then frowns. "Abigail, whatever do you have all over your face? It looks like oily paste." Abigail had been gazing down at the floor. Now she looks quickly up at her father, and her hands went to her cheeks. Internally blushing crimson and realizing how ridiculous she must appear. "Oh no, so pleased to meet you." Abigail curtsies slightly, looking back to the floor in humiliation. Reverend Stuart sternly. "Now, Abigail, you were to polish pews, not your face. It is most unpleasant to see you like this." He frowns and shakes his head. Nathaniel Reynolds, in smooth tones, perhaps more mocking than sincere. "Well, I'm certain her face will be ready in time for the wedding." The children were laughing loudly and pointing at Abigail with their mother shushing them. Abigail looks up sharply, realizing that Mr. Reynolds had just spoken of her marriage. Abigail internally with growing anger. "He knows also, even him?" She tilts her head to look up at his face. Abigail, continuing thoughts. "He stands so tall and well-dressed. Such a muscular physique. Is it indicative of hard work or hard play? But 'tis his face that unsettles me now." Abigail blushes again at her own confusion as she looks up at him and catches his eyes twinkling back at her. Continuing her thoughts, "How handsome he is, and such beautiful eyes, but those eyes are grinning at my discomfort." Flustered, Abigail looks down and blushes again. Stammering, "The oily paste, I must have spilled some and got it on my hands." Reverend Stuart repeating his own joke. "My dear, you were to clean pews with it, not apply it to yourself. Well now," Mrs. Stuart turns back to Mrs. Reynolds. "We shall see you at 7, sharp for dinner. I have some wonderful Madeira that I know you shall enjoy. And conversation with Dr. Stone is always so enlightening. Isn't it, my dear?" Reverend Stuart turns back to Abigail, mumbling, wishing to end the ordeal. "Most enlightening." Mrs. Reynolds, the rich fabric of her skirt making a swishing sound as she hastens the children up the aisle towards the door. "Come now, Nathaniel. We must be getting on. I have so much to do." Nathaniel Reynolds smiles, bows slightly to Reverend Stuart, nods to Abigail, and walks brusquely up the aisle to where his aunt now stands waiting. Abigail looks back down at the floor, humiliated as much by the knowledge that too many people already know of her impending marriage as by the oily paste that makes her look ridiculous. Reverend Stuart, waiting just long enough for the Reynolds to leave. "Now, Abigail, when you're finished here, you must go straight home and inform Mrs. Fitzsimmons that we shall have more at dinner." He smiles broadly, pleased to be entertaining a Reynolds. "Oh, and Abigail, do make certain you get all that paste off your face. It does look quite silly, you know." He turns to walk back to his study, Abigail mumbling aloud, "Yes, I suppose it does." Continuing internally, "I am mortified. Mr. Reynolds must think me a complete fool. And what was that other thing he had said earlier? Not worth ruining. Oh, bother." Abigail rolls her eyes and finds herself laughing out loud, calling to her father, "I have finished the pew I was working on. I shall come back to do the rest tomorrow." Continuing internally, "At least if I marry old Dr. Stone, I would not have to polish church pews anymore." Mrs. Cobb is walking up the aisle with some papers for Reverend Stuart. She appears bewildered and shaking her head. Abigail places her food package on a nearby pew and interrupts her. "I'm leaving some food for Father, Mrs. Cobb. I shall be leaving before he does." Mrs. Cobb nods and then goes back to sorting her papers. Abigail, internally reaching for a rag to rub paste off her face. "I hope she heard me, for I don't want to have to serve it to Father myself. Better he should forget me for a while." Abigail stuffs the rags back into the oily paste sack, crisscrosses and knots her scarf about her, and makes her way up the aisle to the door. Scene 5. Abigail walks home. Abigail, internally, her mind racing as she walks. "Somehow I must make Dr. Stone despise me, or I must find someone Father approves of to replace him. Surely there was some quite perfect man somewhere, someone Father would approve and I could stand, someone who would come and free me from marrying Dr. Stone. Someone like that very handsome Mr. Reynolds. And those eyes, those very beautiful eyes that twinkled at my distress." Abigail frowns. "No, Mr. Reynolds is not the gentleman I seek." Scene 6. The kitchen, early evening. Mrs. Fitzsimmons, leaning over the hot kitchen hearth to pour some chicken broth into an iron pot filled with herbs and sliced potatoes and turnips. She rolls up a clean rag and wraps it around her hand to protect her as she lifts a heavy lid out of the embers by its handle and presses it over the pot. "Well now, that's done and ready to cook." Mrs. Fitzsimmons hums a tune, pleased that the meal preparations are going well. Abigail responding, "Yes, it is. I suppose I should be washing up." She smiles. "Perhaps I should appear at dinner with both flour and oily paste on my face. That might frighten off the doctor." Mrs. Fitzsimmons rolls her eyes upward and shakes her head. Washing down the table, Abby smiles at the thought of how she might shock Father and Dr. Stone with her appearance. Mrs. Fitzsimmons has already pulled the bathing tub from its place against the wall and dragged it over to the fire, and Abby had emptied several pails of well water into it. Mrs. Fitzsimmons, interrupting Abigail's fantasies. "The water over the fire is about to boil, Abby. Strip yourself down and I'll mix it with cold that's already there. Now, don't waste time or the water will cool." Abigail sits down to remove her shoes and stockings and then stands to peel away her homespun clothes, at the same time picking up a woolen blanket that Mrs. Fitzsimmons had left on a chair, draping herself in it, and watching as Mrs. Fitzsimmons stirs some dried flowers into the steaming water. Mrs. Fitzsimmons laughing, "They'll soothe you and maybe even take some of the oily paste smell away. Mind you to soap your hair good, and I'll be back to rinse it when you're ready. I'll be in the dining room, finishing up the table." Abigail throws the blanket over the back of a strategically located chair and steps into the middle of the tub. Abigail, internal monologue. "The hot water feels good against my calves, but oh, what will marriage be like? Will I have more freedom as a married woman? What kind of husband will Dr. Stone make? Many young girls marry older men. Some of them may even been in love. I wonder how old Dr. Stone actually is. Father is in his 50s, and Dr. Stone is probably in his 60s. Not many men lived to 60, and a few men of 60 do seem vital. Dr. Stone is not one of them. He is stiff, and his skin is gray and wrinkled, and the few teeth he has are very, very yellow, and his breath. Abigail rolls her eyes upward. No, Dr. Stone will never seem less than 75 to me. There's nothing youthful in him. Should she laugh at the picture of Dr. Stone tending the image of a youthful knight on horseback, or should she cry at the prospect of marrying an old man? Abigail sobered. She caught her breath, and then she began to sob. What of the, marriage intimacies? Women hint about them, usually in whispers. Julia says nothing in her letters. Mrs. Fitsam had spent little of her 10-year married years with her husband, and he had died in England while traveling on business. She must have little experience herself. I remember over tea when Mrs. Fitsam told me that married women are expected to service their husbands. A flashback to the kitchen. No bath located there. You mean be a servant to them? Mrs. Fitsam. No, married women must perform certain acts of a very intimate nature for their husbands. Usually these acts take place in bed. On your wedding night, you must lie with your husband, and he will teach you what you need to know. Fade back to the bathtub. Abigail. She left me very confused. There is so much I don't know, but I fear I shall have to share this body with Dr. Stone. I mustn't imagine Dr. Stone naked and ugly pressing against my own nakedness. I mustn't imagine him kissing me, feeling his thick blue lips. Abigail shudders in disgust, rises from the tub, forgetting her hair and grabbing the blanket. Abigail speaking aloud. And what shall I wear tonight? My oldest and ugliest dress? Something that will make me appear clumpy? But what about that Nathaniel Reynolds? He will also be at dinner. I should like to impress him, if only to win back my dignity. She smiles to herself and then giggles. Yes, I shall even the score. He sees me as an oafish minister's daughter with oily paste all over my face. I shall startle him with elegance, or at least cleanliness, and then ignore any attention he bestows on me. I shall disregard him as he did me. She caresses herself innocently and continues. What would kissing him feel like? I could imagine Mr. Reynolds standing naked, tall and elegant, with strong arms to hold me and powerful hands to caress me. Oh, I could imagine the fire dancing on the walls, dancing at the ball, and then his mocking eyes, but I mustn't imagine that at all. Flashback. Abigail's eyes flash to a brief flashback of Nathaniel laughing eyes in the church. The flashback ends. They are laughing at me. Besides, he thinks women sport. He said he wants women to ruin. Bother. Why is so handsome a man such a beast? No, I think I shall keep my distance from Mr. Reynolds. He is too dangerous a man for me to know. But I shall enjoy watching his face when I walk into the room tonight. Yes, he will be overwhelmed by my elegance. Abigail reaches for a bowl of water that lies on the floor next to the tub and then leans forward to pour the water over her head and into the tub. After rubbing some soap into her hands until they're full of suds, she rubs the lather into her hair and then reaches down for more water to rinse out all the soap. Mrs. Fitsam comes in. Mrs. Fitsam. There now, Abby, you should have called me. That hair of yours is so thick and wild with curls, it takes a lot of rinse water. It's a wonder you managed to hide it under a mob cap so. Abigail retorting. Braids. 'Tis the braids that I do first before tying it up. They pull it tight together so it seems to be thinner. It wouldn't work without the braids. Mrs. Fitsam. There now, I know that. Lean forward and I'll get out all the soap. Mind you, lean over the tub. Abigail muttering. If only it were so easy to rid myself of that vile old man. She shivers. She steps over to the warmth of the fire. Mrs. Fitson, smiling. Have you decided what you're going to wear tonight, Abby? Something old and drab, I suppose, to frighten off Dr. Stone? Abby, seeming lost in thoughts. No, I shall look elegant tonight. I think I shall wear that pale blue silk that Julia sent me with those dresses from France, October last. Mrs. Fitson. Well, that's a change of heart. You've never worn that dress before, or anything Julia has sent. But I remember you trying it on when it came from France. Wasn't it a trifle daring? Are you sure your father will approve? I seem to recall that it displayed you a bit too much to advantage. Abigail, smiling at the memory. Oh, yes, I think it will do perfectly. She turns and walks out of the kitchen, down the narrow hallway, and up the stairs to her bedchamber. Continuing to herself, Mrs. Fitson. Abigail does not seem herself. She's become a fighter. No, it isn't like her these days to give in to something that she despises. Maybe she's planning something horrible to embarrass her father. No, Abby loves him in spite of their differences. Maybe she doesn't feel well. No, her color is good and she has lots of spirit. Maybe she thinks the doctor would keel over and die if he saw a bit of her body. No, she wasn't a schemer. Maybe her attitudes were becoming more realistic. Now that would be a change. Perhaps Abigail had looked about her and recognizes that marriage is serious business and not the romantic gibberish of poets and artists. Maybe Abigail has simply decided that marriage to Dr. Stone was for the best. I do hope 'tis so. I do wish her happy. Scene 7. Abigail's bedroom. Abigail, wearing a simple chemise, sits on the edge of her bed and begins to brush the wet tangles out of her rich red hair. Dividing it into sections, she patiently rubs each one dry with a thick cloth and then begins to brush it back from the sides of her face. Fastening it in place with bone pins, she allows the waves to fall from the crown of her head and down her back. Abigail, thinking to herself, smiling, Yes, I shall make him regret his incivility. I shall make him want what he cannot have. Humming merrily to herself, Abigail begins to pull on the fragile stockings Sister had sent with the gown. Continuing to speak to herself, Oh, my! Ladies in France must be very brave to wear their gowns so revealing, and to wear so little beneath. Well, I shall be very brave myself. This night I shall imagine I am French. She pulls the thin blue silk gown over her head and smoothed its flowing skirt over her hips. Reaching back, she catches her breath in order to close the fasteners that hold the dress in place at the tight waist. Her breasts fill the deep circle of the open bodice, and her long, graceful arms, usually covered by layers of material, show to advantage by the tiny puffed sleeves that barely conceal her shoulders. Startled by her own appearance in the glass, Abigail giggles to herself. I must remember not to lean over the table, for Father would surely never survive my breasts falling out of my dress and onto my plate, and Dr. Stone would surely choke, and I wonder what Mr. Reynolds would do. Abigail sat back in her bed, opened a book, and waited to be called for dinner. Scene 8. The dining room and hall. Mrs. Fitsum, downstairs, filling glasses with water when Reverend Stuart comes in the door to the front hall. Hurrying over to him, she takes his cloak and brushes it clean of the city's dust. Reverend Stuart, is everything arranged for dinner? Sniffing at the kitchen smells, nodding good. Then his voice becomes anxious. And what of Abby? Mrs. Fitsum puts her finger to her lips to silence him and whispers, "'Tis wondrous indeed. Abigail is behaving as though she is agreeable to marriage with Dr. Stone." Reverend Stuart, startled. What? She seemed very distracted this day when I saw her at the church. She had oily paste all over her face. I cannot fathom why she would do such a thing. Mrs. Fitsum puts her fingers to her lips again and shakes her head, whispering, "Abigail has been very quiet since returning home. While we prepared dinner, she seemed completely occupied with her thoughts, and she said little unkindly of Dr. Stone, as she usually does. And then she decided to wear one of her French gowns to dinner. She must have decided in the doctor's favor if she intends to dress it so for him." Reverend Stuart, "Oh my, yes, indeed. This is good news." Reverend Stuart clasps his hands together silently and smiles, relieved that Abigail was finally showing good sense. Mrs. Fitsum whispering, "One thing more. The gown Abigail is wearing is very French, very, very daring. These dresses Julia sent that women wear in France and in England are very different from what ladies wear here. You mustn't chide her for wearing it, or you will make her feel like a child and she will become angry. And then she will become stubborn and spoil all your plans. Besides, when Dr. Stone sees her in this dress, he will want her no matter what her temper." Reverend Stuart, frowning, "I do hope she realizes that we have a good reputation to keep. Modesty is women's measurement of worthiness." Continuing to himself, "The risk of angering Abby is probably very real, but if Dr. Stone's intention is to wed, could truly be reinforced by a dress, then perhaps it'd be best that she wear it. But might the dress prove an embarrassment? No, Abby is a modest girl and would never wear anything shocking." Reverend Stuart purses his lips and nods at Mrs. Fitsum. "I shall say nothing to keep the peace." Reverend Stuart clasps his hand and shakes them again, as though congratulating himself. Mrs. Fitsum, "And one more thing. Do not bring up the wedding tonight with other guests present. Abigail is sensitive to these things, and they must be handled with great care." Reverend Stuart, "You are right, Mrs. Fitsum. I shall be most cautious in my approach to Abigail, but I shall apply immediately for the banns." They notice a rapping sound from the front door. Mrs. Fitsum walks over to the door, smooths her apron and her hair, and pulls it open. Dr. Stone, Josiah Wilding, and Ethan Wright enter. Mrs. Fitsum, smiling, "Good evening, gentlemen. Do come right in and be seated in the dining room. Dinner is ready, and it mustn't be kept, or the flavor will spoil." Hanging their cloaks on wall pegs, the gentlemen greet Reverend Stuart and make their way to the table. As soon as they are seated, Reverend Stuart waves his hand to an empty chair and explains, "The extra seat is for Mr. Nathaniel Reynolds. He is in town visiting his relations, the Reynolds family, and he has agreed to join us at our party. That must be him now." Reverend Stuart responds to the rapping sound of the front door. Smiling, he begins to pour out a rich burgundy to his guests as Mrs. Fitsum goes to answer the door. A moment later, she appears at the table with a note for Reverend Stuart. He looks at it and frowns. "It seems our guest, Mr. Reynolds, has been delayed by urgent business, and we should go ahead without him." "Well, we shall." Mrs. Fitsum to herself, "Reverend Stuart is surely disappointed. though he hides it well. Mrs. Fitsum, turning to the front hall and leaning up to the stairs, calling, Abigail! Scenes 9, 10, and 11. Mrs. Fitsum turns to the front hall and leans up the stairs to call Abigail as the men chat about the day's activities. Then she hurries to the kitchen to catch the dinner before it overcooks itself. Mrs. Fitsum calling upstairs, Abigail! Abigail's bedroom. Fade to Abigail has dozed off. Abigail is dreaming of France and the very daring French dress. Mrs. Fitsum's voice startles her awake. She hears gentlemen in conversation below, and she knows she must go down and help serve dinner. Standing up, she smooths out the skirt of her gown and glances quickly in the mirror, only to blush at her own reflection. Abigail to herself, This will not do. It is Mr. Reynolds I wish to unnerve, not myself. Now what shall I do? She reaches the front hall. No one in the dining room sees her. Quickly she turns and rushes down the narrow hall, along the stairs, and into the kitchen, where she pushes the door shut behind her and presses against it as though to bolt it. Mrs. Fitsum looks up from her tray of vegetables in surprise. Mrs. Fitsum, Well, you're out of breath now, aren't you? Abigail glares back at her. Mrs. Fitsum can be so tiresome about the obvious, it wouldn't do to agree. Abigail, her voice full of innocence, Am I? Abigail, continuing to herself, Mrs. Fitsum is so very, very good. Will she win this little game of deception? She always did, especially if I am even slightly distracted. Mrs. Fitsum clears her throat and stifles laughter, her face serious. Well now, perhaps that gown doesn't allow you enough air to breathe as you should. Abigail lifts her head defiantly as Mrs. Fitsum turns to cough into a towel. Abigail sharply, The gown is quite fine. I am breathing perfectly well. Thank you. Are those vegetables for the gentleman? Mrs. Fitsum simply nods and turns to arrange the roast on a plate. Abigail walks over to the table and picks up a platter. Abigail carefully holds the tray as though to hide her bosom behind it. I shall serve these, Mrs. Fitsum replying, Fine. Abigail walks over to the dining room door and pushes her way through. Scene 12, the Stuart dining room. Reverend Stuart, finishing a prayer and raising his glass. Amen. To your health. Carefully, Abigail steps around him and makes her way down to the opposite end of the table where she was to sit. The men are drinking, laughing among themselves, but as Abby turns and leans forward to place the platter of vegetables on the table, their laughter hushes. Abigail looks up. Reverend Stuart was the first to break the silence. He suddenly becomes aware that he was still holding his glass midair, though he had clearly forgotten to complete the toast. And now he coughs and clears his throat and stammers, Abigail, dear, do sit down and join us. Abigail nods and takes her seat and looks about her while one of the gentlemen helps position her chair. Abigail, internal monologue. He's not here. The realization that the object of her efforts was not present causes Abigail distress. She frowns, furious that her plan to stun Mr. Reynolds might be in vain. Innocently, she asks, There is an extra seat. Is someone else joining us? Reverend Stuart, responding without looking directly at her, No, Mr. Reynolds had urgent business and he could not make our party. Reverend Stuart to himself, Why would she ask that? After all, Abby brought the message of the extra guest home to Mrs. Fitsum. It must be her nerves. She must feel uneasy knowing Dr. Stone's intentions. Abigail, lifting her face to look at each of the gentlemen, I see. They stare back at her, stunned by her appearance. She looks quickly down at her lap to hide a blush. Josiah Wilding coughs. He takes off his spectacles and begins to clean them with his handkerchief. His hand is shaking. Abigail, internal monologue. And Dr. Stone's at least 80. I fear I shall lose my appetite for dinner. Ethan Wright, transfixed, sits next to the doctor. He shakes his head slightly, blinks his eyes, and says, "You look particularly well this evening, Miss Stuart. May I pour you some wine?" His voice catches in his throat. "I shall pour her wine," Dr. Stone interrupts. Dr. Stuart, thinking, must Dr. Stone show irritation at the attention of Mr. Wright is showing Abigail? But he knows well his own importance, and he bristles easily. If overlooked, he does not like to be shown to disadvantage, especially by upstarts like Ethan Wright. Dr. Stone gets to his feet, picks up a bottle of Burgundy from the sideboard, and makes his way to Abby's chair. Leaning over her, he pours her a glass of wine, breathing heavily down her neck all the while. Abigail, internally, why does his breath always smell so foul? Dr. Stone, leaning closer to her face, would you like anything else, my dear? Abigail stammering, no, thank you. Dr. Stone pats her hand as Abigail stifles an urge to draw it back. She looks up at her father. He sits looking pleased. Abigail, suddenly realizing Reverend Stuart's thoughts. Oh my God, this is most dreadful. He thinks that I've dressed this way for Dr. Stone. How appalling! She looks about the table. Josiah Walding is still staring at her as best he can through his thick lenses. Ethan Wright is mumbling poetry and staring at her as though entranced. Dr. Stone has returned to his seat and now glares at Ethan Wright, and then turns his gaze to Abigail, his lower lip trembling slightly. Dr. Stone, anything you want, my dear. Just ask me for anything. Abigail, internal monologue. She begins to recognize her own desires and something more, perhaps the freedom to be the person she knew as Abigail. I may not know precisely what I want, but I do know that you are too old to give it to me. But 'tis somewhat enjoyable to have so unsettling an effect on another. This feminine power might even be used to advantage. Abigail's face reddens at her thoughts, and she brushes them away. I am a minister's daughter, even if I am not dressed as one. But I wonder what Julia would do if she were here now. Mrs. Fitsum pushes through the dining room door with a huge platter of sliced roast and gravy and places it triumphantly in the middle of the table. The men applaud and she smiles, pleased at the compliment. Mrs. Fitsum, is there bread enough on table? Or do you need more? I have a lovely batch of sweet cornbread baked fresh this afternoon. Suddenly, Abigail wanted to be away from the table. Mrs. Fitsum is serving the gentleman large portions of roast, and the cornbread gave her good excuse to stand. She jumps up before anyone can protest and says, too brightly, I'd love some cornbread. In fact, I shall take it and warm it up. Abigail, internally, will take several minutes and give me a rest from the gawking eyes of the gentleman. Making her way into the kitchen, through the open door, she snatches the iron pan of cornbread and places it in the burning embers at the edge of the fire. Then she sits down at the table and closes her eyes while talking continues through the open door. Mr. Wright. Miss Stuart. Abigail opens her eyes to the tall figure of Ethan Wright looming over her. Bother. Abigail, bothered but politely. Yes, Mr. Wright? Mr. Wright. Miss Stuart, I just want to make certain, that is, I just want to be sure that you were not offended by, that is, by anything I might have said to you this morning. He appears distracted and his words are garbled and very much in his throat. He goes on, I mean, when I questioned that you were paying attention, about your education. I mean, I'm certain you must be very well educated, as your father says you are, and an education is not so very important for a woman anyway. I mean, not that they cannot learn, but that it isn't necessary. I mean, most men don't even care if their wives can read, except perhaps to teach the children. I mean, it isn't necessary to having children and tending house, although, I'm certain that you are very well learned, and I mean no offense. I mean, what does a woman need to know Latin for anyway? He attempts to laugh. Abigail had never seen him so flustered. She says nothing. Mr. Wright continues, and I just wanted you to know that I admire you a good deal, and that I've noticed, how you've grown up, and I want you to know that I think I may even feel a stronger bond between us, since I've noticed you're growing up, that is, and I know that you are considering marriage with Dr. Stone, and I thought perhaps that you might consider me. I mean, you might prefer him to me. I may not be so rich or well known as Dr. Stone, but I am certainly better educated, and he smiles down his nose at her, looking a bit too pleased with himself. I have been told that I am extremely attractive to those of your gender. Abigail still says nothing. Ethan Wright appears anxious. I hope you understand that I would consider you a decent wife even if you can't conjugate a verb in Latin. He laughs at his own jest. Abigail's face masks her disdain. She stares silently at Mr. Wright and then recites in a light schoolgirl sing-song, Tecum ego non, amo amus amas amatis. Getting up from her seat, she uses a towel to pick up the cornbread, turns it over onto a platter, and walks back into the dining room, leaving behind a very distracted Mr. Wright. Dr. Stone nervously runs Abigail's empty chair to Ethan Wright's empty chair. Oh, there you are, my dear. She places the platter of cornbread on the table and sits down. Abigail to herself, amused. My, one proposal already, and it's early yet. It's early in the evening. I think Julia would be proud. I shall have to write to her and tell her the stir her dress has caused. She picked up her glass of wine and took a sip. Mustn't drink too much. Giggling into the wine, for I must remember all offers of marriage in their proper order. She looks down the table and catches her father and Dr. Stone whispering together. Abby's smile fades. Oh, God, he might actually propose. Feeling a sense of dread, she puts down her wine glass and stands up, saying politely, aloud, Excuse me, gentlemen, but I am feeling weary this evening. I believe I shall retire. She turns and walks out to the front hall and up the stairs before anyone has a chance to object. Scene 13. Bedroom, hallway, and kitchen. Glad for the privacy of her own room, Abigail strips off the French gown and its sheer undergarments and packs them carefully away in a trunk. Then she slips a thick cotton nightgown over her head and pulls it down over her hips. Sitting on the edge of her bed, she brushes out her hair, tying it into a single long braid. She stretches back and rests her head against the pillow, closing her eyes, but then she cannot sleep. To herself, a bit excited. How could I imagine having so great an effect on men? Oh, and a proposal from Dr. Stone? I suppose I should read, but I really don't care to just now. She hears the men still talking downstairs. Abigail aloud to herself, I wonder what they are saying. Perhaps they are talking about me. Perhaps I should slip down to the kitchen and listen to them. I might learn more of Father's plans that way. Abigail picks up a flannel blanket from the foot of her bed and wraps it about her shoulders, tiptoeing out into the upstairs hall. She listens carefully to the noise below, and when the laughter grows most loud, she slips down the stairs and along the narrow hallway to the kitchen. There, she quietly pulls a chair to a spot behind the dining room door. Grabbing a piece of bread from the table to nibble, She wraps herself in the blanket and settles down on her chair to spy. The door to the kitchen is suddenly pushed open, and Abby jumps up to keep from getting struck. Mrs. Fitsum comes in carrying 2 empty platters piled high with empty dishes, taking care not to break any of the fine, fragile porcelain. She slides the dishes into a small basin of hot water sitting at the table and starts to wash them clean. Abigail in a loud whisper, "Mrs. Fitsum! Shh, Mrs. Fitsum!" Mrs. Fitsum turns and gasps, startled. "Oh, Abby, you startled me so. I didn't realize anyone was here. What are you doing up? I thought you pleaded exhaustion." Abigail, matter-of-factly, "No, I just wanted to get away from the table. Dr. Stone's breath, it was making me faint." Abby clasps her hand across her mouth to keep from laughing. Mrs. Fitsum shakes her head. Mrs. Fitsum, "Well, these dishes are done. The fire has been banked, the food is put away, and the gentlemen are eating pie and fruit and cheese and drinking port. I think I shall retire, for I truly am exhausted." She nods towards the dining room. "If they need anything important, come and wake me." Yawning, she turns and goes to her room behind the kitchen. Abby pulls the blanket tightly about her and leans her head against the wall. Abigail to herself, "It would be easy to hear the gentlemen this way. It might prove interesting to listen to what they might say when they think there are no women about. I suppose they are very different among themselves." Fade to dining room. A rapping sound comes from the front hall, and Reverend Stuart stands up. Reverend Stuart walking toward the door. "I'll get that." Abigail to herself, "Who could that be? Perhaps a parishioner might be sick or dying at this late hour and in need of father." Sounds of greeting, muffled footsteps, and then Reverend Stuart is back in the dining room making introductions. "Gentlemen, permit me to introduce Mr. Nathaniel Reynolds of Virginia. Mr. Reynolds is the nephew of Mr. and Mrs. James Reynolds of our church. Mr. Reynolds, these are Dr. Stone, Mr. Hosea Wilding, and Mr. Ethan Wright. Do be seated, Mr. Reynolds. I believe I promised you some first-rate Madeira." Mr. Reynolds, pleasantly, "That sounds most gratifying. I am sorry to be so late, but I had some business with the captain of a ship that came to port this evening." Mr. Wright, "Are you from Virginia? Are you a planter in tobacco?" Mr. Reynolds, "No, I do have a good piece of land, but we breed cattle and horses and grow mostly food for their benefit. I've also invested somewhat in trade between England and the colonies, furnishings, tools, those sorts of items that keep easy and travel well. And you, Mr. Wright? How do you make your way?" Mr. Wright responding, "I teach the classics, of course." "The college, the academy, the charitable school?" Mr. Reynolds asks. Mr. Wright, as though offended, "Certainly not. The Latin school." Reverend Stuart smiling, "I do believe that a classic education makes a most complete man, don't you, Mr. Reynolds? By that, I mean that it teaches one to think in an ordinary fashion, in an orderly fashion, to reason with precision, it disciplines one for life. Indeed, I am so in favor of a classical education that I felt compelled to have my daughters study the classics. Do you know, Mr. Wright, my Abigail is quite quick in Latin." Mr. Wright blushing slightly. "That is most commendable. Nowadays, of course, it is more common for girls to study classically. Mr. Anthony Bizet includes some Greek and Latin along with needlework at his school for girls." Mr. Reynolds, "I was educated classically, and while I agree it gives one a certain finish, I find it serves me little when dealing with tradesmen." Mr. Wright is observing Mr. Reynolds closely. Wright saw Reynolds was attractive, friendly, wealthy, and educated. Not the sort of person he hoped would come visiting the Stuart house while Abigail was unmarried. Right to himself, after all, should she come to her senses, she will surely choose me instead of Dr. Stone. I must discourage this friendship, and thereby prevent his becoming another rival. I shall make their differences so evident to both Mr. Reynolds and Reverend Stuart that they will neither care for the other. Mr. Wright aloud. Don't tell me you favor a practical education, Mr. Reynolds. Mr. Reynolds. Well, I do believe that practical education is practical for most. Reverend Stuart, grumbling and a bit annoyed. I certainly hope you are not a supporter of Dr. Franklin with his practical education dogma. Ethan Wright smiles. This is going very well indeed. Mr. Reynolds, pleasantly. I know very few tradesmen who credit their business success to knowledge of archaic languages or ancient history. Knowledge of simple words and numbers best suit their needs. All else is a diversion, and though I personally consider the acquisition of knowledge one of the great adventures, I do not believe it essential for everyone. Dr. Stone sits listening and drinking wine. Mr. Reynolds turns to him. What are your opinions on the subject, Dr. Stone? Should we all converse in Greek? Reverend Stuart still grumbling. Oh, don't ask him. He's a friend of Franklin, and has been since they worked together to get the Pennsylvania hospital established. They are lodge brothers, I believe. He rolled his eyes upward. Dr. Stone dryly. The hospital is a rather worthy cause. Oh, certainly, of course, but Dr. Franklin has so entrenched himself as an authority on all things, I cannot help but have misgivings. Dr. Stone turning to Mr. Reynolds, but speaking jocularly. Perhaps if he showed up in church more regularly, I think perhaps Reverend Stuart is upset with Benjamin Franklin because though he calls himself a Presbyterian, and though he tithes to the church, he does not attend regular services. If he did, others might be drawn to the church since he has influence, and some of those others might even be moneyed. He poured himself another glass of port. Reverend Stuart, coloring. That is untrue, my friend. Certainly, I always look for new parishioners, but that's my duty to God as his servant. I do find it annoying, however, that Dr. Franklin involves himself in the founding and building of every new church in this town, while virtually ignoring services in his own. Dr. Stone sipped his port and laughed. And you also find it annoying that the most influential in this town attend Christ's Church. Reverend Stuart shaking his head. Alas, even Lord Penn has become an Anglican, and there is this problem of making peace between the old side Presbyterians and those hell and damnation new side Presbyterians. Another great awakening, they say. Dr. Stone. Church attendance grows in spite of all that. My friend, you must learn not to be affected by these things. I tell you this as both your doctor and a friend. The Presbyterian Church is growing with the town. You need not fear its demise. You must only be concerned with maintaining your control. You must always maintain control if you are to achieve your desires. I myself live by that rule. I demand control of anything or anyone who I take on. Consider how strict I am with my Irish prentice, Jake. Dr. Stone began to slur his words, and Mr. Reynolds frowns as he watches the doctor pour himself more wine. There is a moment's silence. Mr. Wright turns to Mr. Reynolds. Mr. Wright, contempt creeping into his voice. So, you are a practical man just like Franklin? What else do you have in common? Mr. Reynolds looks oddly at Mr. Wright. Reynolds, thinking internally, perhaps it is his style to be rude. Mr. Reynolds answering out loud, well, I enjoy good philosophical debate, though I often come out the libertine, so the Philosophical Society is to my liking, and the library. I understand Dr. Franklin helped gather subscriptions for it. Reverend Stuart, the library was more James Logan's creation than Dr. Franklin's, though Mr. Logan gave much credit to Mr. Franklin at the time. You would think that having been the secretary to Sir William Penn, Mr. Logan would have been more wary of Franklin. Mr. Wright interjects. Why do you say this, Mr. Reynolds? I think I understand the Reverend's suspicions, and I share them, though I am no great supporter of Dr. Franklin. You see, he is from Boston. He has a Puritan background. Puritans cannot tolerate or allow for differences of opinion or belief, or for differences in the way people live. The Puritan in Dr. Franklin loves rules, controls, and the centralization of power. I suspect that he loves it the best centered in his own hands, since Puritans have a most annoying confidence that they know what's best for everyone. He laughs out loud and shakes his head. A Puritan will write a law in the wilderness and then grumble when the beasts do not obey. And while Dr. Franklin appears to respect people's differences when he helps build those different churches, he is a great moralizer and has very strong opinions about how society should be run and not how it should run itself. He pauses a moment. Philadelphia has run itself according to Quaker values, and while Quakers may run their own families with strict rules, they are very tolerant of others and quite willing to share their city with those whose values differ. Dr. Franklin is imposing New England stubbornness on Philadelphia. I hear he is to be off to Albany in New York Colony this summer, meeting with delegates from throughout the North to talk about a defensive union, not something our Quaker friends could support. Reverend Stuart appears impressed by the analysis, and he nods, smiling, while Ethan Wright frowns. Mr. Reynolds continues. Philadelphia is more egalitarian community than Boston. Oh yes, the social classes here are as distinct as elsewhere, and many entrusted with public office have taken advantage of position to further their families. But you tolerate differences. Writing laws for people from so many different countries and cultures must be very difficult. Perhaps toleration is simply the easy path, but it works. You live and let others live greatly as they choose. You have respect for people's abilities to choose for themselves. What you resent, and rightly so, is that Dr. Franklin has been instilling Puritan rules and order in Philadelphia. Dr. Stuart emphatically. Exactly. That is what I mean. I become a bit suspicious of Franklin when he distributed his first political pamphlet about 30 years ago. It urged Philadelphians to accept a paper currency, always a bad idea in my mind. And then, of course, when the idea became acceptable, he was hired to print the money. At the time, he referred to it as a, quote, most profitable job. Mr. Reynolds laughing, I should think so. How nice to print wealth. And he has himself become wealthy. He sips his wine. My, this is very, very good wine. Holding the glass up to the light to admire its color. Reverend Stuart appears pleased. Ethan Wright is not. The two men were getting along too well. He interrupted. Come now. You fear loss of freedom in Philadelphia while your own house needs cleaning. Your Virginia House of Burgesses passes quite as many regulations as do the Massachusetts lawmakers. Reynolds laughing again. Yes, but we pay them no heed. How do you keep order, Mr. Reynolds? Any man of business will tell you that the marketplace makes its own order. It is in placating lawmakers that confusion is created. Virginia is farmland. The homes are very far apart. We have no large town as this city. People learn to depend upon themselves and make their own rules. Of course, our lawmakers prey on us passing laws to determine the height of fences and to control our planting and harvesting and all aspects of our dealings. And yes, we do pay fines to mollify them when we have been found guilty of breaching some usually silly law, but we are extremely dispersed, and they cannot discipline what they cannot oversee. Remember, lawmakers and their clerks are freeloaders. They produce nothing of value and live off the monies they take from those who actually work. When we break a law, we pay them money, and that they take as a salary. You can be sure that they will always pass laws in their own favor. We are fortunate in Virginia that the House of Burgesses has no means by which to control each household. Should that come to pass, we will surely lose our freedoms. Mr. Reynolds shakes his head. There is something amiss in those who have a need to govern others, and that includes those among my fellow Virginians who are so unchristian as to hold slaves. They are a menace to us all. Mr. Wright. I have met some of your fellow Virginians, Mr. Reynolds, and yes, I did not find them so free-thinking. In truth, I found their enthusiasm for the monarchy tiring. Mr. Reynolds. That is but affectation, laughed Mr. Reynolds. Their manner and style may reflect that of the English aristocracy, but they do not pretend to enjoy English rule. Dr. Stone, frowning. They are quite willing to accept the king's protection. Mr. Reynolds, sputtering. Protection? The king protects no one. He pauses, speaking quietly. He sits on his throne, getting fat off the work of others. Foolish men die fighting wars to make him rich. When did the king last get off his seat and protect you? I suspect he'd run from danger like the coward, and you'd be left to fight for yourself. He's leaving our defense to ourselves. Mr. Wright, you speak treason. You are lucky none of the king's servants are present, or it might cost you. Reverend Stuart frowns, thinking to himself, it would not be proper for me to encourage this conversation further. Antagonism for the monarchy may be growing. I fear it may one day push us all in jeopardy. I fear it might one day place us all in jeopardy. Reverend Stuart aloud. Well, we all feel a bit overwhelmed by rules and regulations. Let us think on happier things. He lifts a bottle and smiles. More wine, gentlemen? He proceeds to refill their glasses. A sudden snoring sound from the table's end catches the gentleman's notice. They turn and they see that Hosea Walding has fallen forward in sleep, and now his forehead rests in his pie. Dr. Stone shakes his head. "'Tis time, I think, to get him home to bed. Gentlemen, I shall require your assistance in this endeavor." Mr. Reynolds and Mr. Wright smile, nod, and stand up to help waken the sleeping Mr. Wilding, as Reverend Stuart wets a cloth with which to clean his forehead. "He is welcome to sleep here. We could carry him to a bed." Dr. Stone shakes his head. "No, thank you, but Zaya gets very confused these days to wake up anywhere but in his own bed. I shall stop by tomorrow morning to take care of that matter we discussed earlier. For now, I shall see him home. Thank you for a most pleasant evening," Reverend Stuart speaking. "I hope we may share many more." Stuart and Dr. Stone exchange smiles and handshakes. Mr. Wilding, mumbling to himself to Dr. Stone, Where is the angel?" Mr. Wright cleans the pie off of Mr. Wilding's forehead and laughs. "Ah, she flew away, as now we must, Hosea. Allow us to help you up." Confused and not quite awake, the elderly man permits the gentleman to stand him up and walk him into the front hall, where they help him into his coat. Dr. Stone. I have my carriage waiting. It's just outside. My indentured boy Jake waiting. Getting him home should be no problem." The gentlemen thank Reverend Stuart for a most enjoyable dinner and evening, and Mr. Reynolds reminds him again. Aunt Lydia is anxious that the Stuarts simply must attend her party. Narrator. A few more pleasantries are exchanged, and then the gentlemen leave. Reverend Stuart closes and latches the front door, blows out the candles, and turns and climbs up the stairs to his bed. Abigail hears the front door close. She hears her father's footsteps on the stairs and waits until she hears the door to his bedchamber closed. Then she slips out of the kitchen, up the stairs to her own room. Tired at last, she lays down to sleep. Thinking, I have learned nothing except that Mr. Reynolds appears most polite. Perhaps he is only uncivil towards women. He may think us all silly creatures deserving ruin by men of his sort. Bother! I should not even think of him, for father's plan is all too evident, and I have no escape. Well, Dr. Stone is at least usually kind, although he does demand his way in most things. Still, there is nothing I shall ever want for as his wife, or is there? Scene 14, Abigail's bedroom, Friday morning. Abigail rolls over and groans. She closes her eyes and pulls the blanket over her head to shut out the late morning sun, but she cannot shut out the events of that morning. Abigail to herself desperately, maybe it was a dream. Maybe it never happened. Abigail pauses. But I know it has. I am, she shudders, now officially engaged to marry Dr. Stone. I had not expected the proposal so soon. Memory hazy. It must have been before 6 o'clock when Mrs. Fitsum rushed in, waking me and telling me that I must come downstairs at once. Scene 15, Reverend Stuart's sitting room, Friday morning. Abigail silently leaps out of bed, half asleep, but fearing that something might be wrong with her father, grabs a robe, stumbles down the steps, and into the front room, where she finds her father sitting and having tea with Dr. Stone. She knows at once what they intended, and she feels a sense of cold dread in her stomach and wants to run, but she cannot move. Reverend Stuart is smiling and offering her tea and explaining. Reverend Stuart, sit down, dear daughter. Dr. Stone and I have a surprise for you that will make you one of the most fortunate women in Philadelphia. Dr. Stone, my dear, I have your honored father's approval. I would be the happiest man if you would accept me in marriage. Abigail stands, unable to move or speak, and then Reverend Stuart smiles at her and tells her, Reverend Stuart, this marriage would make me most happy. It would be the most beneficial. Abigail, do not disappoint me. Abigail nods silently because the words are stuck in her throat. Dr. Stone jumps up from this chair and takes her hands in his and shakes them up and down. Dr. Stone, I feel such immense gratitude. Reverend Stuart smiles, delighted. Abigail, internal dialogue. Riley, so I have agreed to marry Dr. Stone in order to please father. Mrs. Fitsum told the truth when she said that marriage is not for love. Dr. Stone turns to Reverend Stuart. Dr. Stone indistinctly. We will need to arrange for clothing and dressing to fit her new position, a proper trousseau. Reverend Stuart, of course. Dr. Stone smiling and breathing heavily. Must be hurrying to the hospital. Good day, all. Reverend Stuart and Mrs. Fitsum rush up to Abby to embrace her, Mrs. Fitsum crying. Reverend Stuart, we will need to visit the shops today, including the French shop you so love. Abigail looks at them both. Abigail, flippantly, I am going back to bed. End of flashback. Fade to bedroom. Abigail's bedroom. Scene 16. Abigail to herself. That was hours ago. It must be very late now. I suppose I should get up and find out what they have planned for me. Pushing the covers back, she pulls herself up from the bed, walks over to the dressing table and pours some water from the pitcher into the waiting bowl. Splashing cold water on her face helps to relieve the numbness she feels. But she moves slowly, braiding and tying up her hair with fingers that feel like they are tied into knots. And although she feels like crying, the tears do not come. I shall have to write to Julia. Julia would remember Dr. Stone and write back, "Oh, you poor dear, you must just suffer through." But Julia could not actually understand how awful this is. Her life is too perfect for her to imagine my anguish. Abigail pauses and continues to herself. I shall have to move to Dr. Stone's house. He does live in the more developed section of town on 3rd Street near Chestnut, but there is a good deal of noise there and much filth in the streets. Perhaps I can persuade him to move further out. I know laws have been passed restricting the garbage in the streets, but they are difficult to enforce, and the dogs and pigs that run loose and rummage through the waste add to the mess. I shall have to convince Dr. Stone to build a house outside the city. Summers, after all, are hot and sticky, and the closer one's home is to Front Street, where living space is tight, the more unbearable the seasons become. I shudder to think of the alleyways where people live and work, from little 3-story Father, Son, and Holy Ghost homes, with one small room on each floor, few windows, and a hearth that must be kept lit, even in August, for cooking. And disease, so rampant in the summer, makes escape to safer quarters necessary for those who could afford them. It has been easy living here. She thinks ruefully as she pulls a simple brown linen gown over her head and reaches back to tie the sash behind. And then she pulls a large homespun apron dress over the gown and looks at her image in the glass. The wild beauty so apparent the night before is missing. Abigail. At least I am not covered in oily paste, and once I am married I shall dress beautifully and wear my hair uncovered, and Father will have no say as to how I look. Abigail bites her lip, embarrassed by her vengeful thoughts, mumbling and shaking her head. It is childish to think such things. Father appreciates me when I affect a puritanical modesty. Dr. Stone and Ethan Wright appreciate me when I affect the immodesty of a strumpet. There is a me that exists no matter what I wear. I think I should like to be appreciated as that me. Abigail reaches into the trunk for a knit shawl and a bonnet, and then walks quickly down the stairs to the kitchen. A cinnamon scent fills the room. Scene 17, Reverend Stuart's kitchen. Mrs. Fitsum, full of smiles, bustling about the kitchen. Well now, good morning, Abigail, or should I say good noon. So much to do. There's so much planning and shopping, and we have so little time. Abby hardly sits down when Mrs. Fitsum thrusts a hot mug of tea under her nose, along with a plate of hot cornbread sprinkled with cinnamon and honey. I grated that cinnamon myself for you while you slept. 'Tis very full of flavor. Abigail, muttering, thank you, hands clasped, whispers the obligatory prayer of thanks, but does not feel like eating, and then aloud, Amen. Mrs. Fitsum turns to watch her and purses her lips. Now you must eat, Abigail. You'll shrivel up to nothing if you don't eat. And if you shrivel up to nothing, you won't fill out your wedding gown. Abigail, internal monologue, hardly caring. 'Tis a possibility. Mrs. Fitsum. Abigail, you are to meet your father at the church when you are finished here, and the two of you are to call upon a shoemaker and a dressmaker. She leans forward, as if to share a confidence. You know that the dress you wore last night had quite an effect on Dr. Stone. Your father was laughing about it this morning when he left. He told me he was horrified when you first walked into the dining room wearing it. He feared that Dr. Stone would think you a common harlot and him a dreadful father. But Dr. Stone is convinced that you are the most beautiful vision he has ever seen, and he is so anxious for the marriage that it is set 2 weeks from Sunday. Your father has already applied for the banns." Abigail sips her tea. It burns her tongue and startles her through her numbness. She picks up a piece of sweet cornbread and nibbles at it. Abigail, internal monologue. "Today is Friday. In 2 weeks and 2 days, I will become Mrs. Benjamin Stone, my name taken away." Abigail shudders. Mrs. Fitsum notices. "Oh, now, Abby, there's nothing to be afraid of. 'Tis the wedding night, isn't it?" "You fear you won't know how to please him. That's it, isn't it? Now, you mustn't worry, Abby. These things take care of themselves. I'm certain he'll be very happy with you. All you really have to do is lie still and spread your legs a bit. I am told that most men do the deed very quickly." Abigail did not answer. Abigail lost in her thoughts. What would she think if she knew that I was concerned with my own pleasure and not Dr. Stone's? I am told by some that women do not have desires, and by others that women should not have desires. And I think these feelings, this wanting more than I have, this is desire. She frowns. Am I full of evil? Is something wrong that I should feel this way? Fade in. Her father's voice fades in as she remembers. Reverend Stuart. Harlots have desires they cannot control, and that is why they sell their bodies. Reverend Stuart's face fades in as Abigail's voice is heard. To Abigail. Perhaps they sell themselves to buy food for their children. Reverend Stuart shaking his head. As a good girl, you could not possibly understand these desires. Fade out. Abigail to herself. Perhaps I'm not good. Perhaps inside I am a harlot. Abigail finishes her cornbread and sips of the strong tea. Aloud to Mrs. Fitsum. That was quite nice. Mrs. Fitsum, looking pleased. Make certain you have the dressmaker make you some pretty gowns. Your father kept you looking like a Quaker, and a poor one at that. He kept your beauty hidden for fear you might grow vain. Abigail to herself. Or for fear I might embarrass him. Father loves me, but he does not trust me, try as I do to please him. Mrs. Fitsum lifts a pail of milk from the floor onto the table. This is fresh from the Culver's cow down the road. I'm skimming off the cream for butter, but I shall save some for berries at dinner. Abigail smiles. This is usually her job. Abigail asking, would you like me to do the churning? Mrs. Fitsum laughing. No, no, no. Off with you. Those dressmakers are going to need lots of time to sew all the clothes your father plans to order for you. He intends to be very generous. Abby, make sure you let him know that you are grateful. Abby, brightly. Standing, and she adjusts her bonnet, tying the ribbon into a big bow under her chin. Of course, Mrs. Fitsum. And Abby, be sure to order at least one new cloak. You shall need a fancy one for special occasions. The cloak you have is much too worn. Mrs. Fitsum shakes her head and frowns. Abigail pulls her shawl over her shoulders and ties it in place in the front. With a wave to Mrs. Fitsum, she steps out of the back door, turns along the side of the house, and walks toward the front gate. Scene 18. Abigail notices that the air is sweet with the scent of cherry blossoms, and Abigail pauses to delight in their fragrance. To herself, the blossoms are early this year. That means an early summer and perhaps a hot one. Walking toward the front gate, she hesitates as something familiar catches her eye. It is Mr. Wright standing by the corner, appearing impatient. Abigail to herself. He is waiting for something. I hope he is not waiting for me. Abigail ducks behind a thicket and considers what to do. She is in no mood to deal with Mr. Wright, but there was no way to leave the front of the house without him seeing her. I shall go through the back garden, and through the tall hedge, and then through the Clark garden and out to Minor Street. Then I shall walk up Chestnut to Market and take market by the church. Yes, this plan seems reasonable, and the inconvenience is preferable to more conversation with Ethan Wright. Abigail walks back to the rear garden of the house, passes Mrs. Fitsam's herb garden and the rose garden Father had planted for Mother many years before. She comes to the tall hedge and shakes her head. This would not be easy. The hedge is so overgrown. Surely this is a carefully grown hedge whose branches have been braided together since they were small bushes. It ran the length of the property and provided a barrier to the properties behind. Abigail, internal monologue. It stands 4 or 5 feet thick and taller than Father, who believes it to be impenetrable. It was already heavy with early growth, but if I take my time, I might push apart the branches and twigs just enough to get through. I had managed my way through once when I was 5, and though it was a thinner hedge then, I am stronger for the years. Abigail begins to pull apart the tangled branches and to push her way into the dense growth. Muttering as twigs, she scratches her ankles and hands. Ouch! When had the hedge become so thick? It is so much wider than I remembered. Abigail is glad for her bonnet since it keeps her hair from being pulled out, but her legs and her arms are sore from scratches and being twisted in the dense foliage. By the time she realizes the folly of her plan, she is too far in to turn back. Abigail, aloud, ruling the situation. I find myself caught in the middle of the beast. Oh, how ridiculous my situation is, but I must push on. After several minutes of twisting and pulling, her hand comes through to the other side. It is soon followed by a foot, then moves about in midair as though feeling for the ground. Abigail to herself, I cannot tell which direction is up in here. Most of Abigail is still within the hedge, and she cannot help but giggle in spite of her predicament. She imagines Dr. Stone pulling her out of the hedge, flustered with embarrassment. Abigail nervously giggling, Oh, what if Dr. Stone rescued me? This will not do, he would say pompously. Abigail twists about. One more hard push and she's nearly through. She's nearly free and still unable to see clearly through the hedge to the other side. Abigail more soberly, I hope I have aimed for the Clark garden and not the Clark pigsty. I fear that I shall look too disheveled for Father's happiness. Abby digs her foot into a tangle of branches and pushes hard against it, feeling the twigs as they cut into her ankles. In another moment, the hedge releases her, bringing her out and flinging her face down into a garden of freshly turned mud. Her dress, ripped by the plant's sharp branches, is now covered with sticky, filthy compost. Her shawl lay next to her, soaking wet in a puddle of water. Her bonnet is twisted about her face, and mud oozes from beneath its brim. Abigail reaches up to wipe the muck from her eyes and lashes, but her hands are themselves covered with stinking mud, and they provide little relief. Abigail tries to stand up. Help! As she pushes herself up from the slippery compost, her hands slide beneath her, and she falls face down back into the filth. Help! She screams again. A dog starts to bark, and Abigail can hear voices. The huge barn where Mr. Clark builds and repairs carriages is very close. Abigail shouting, Help, Mr. Clark, help me! A door creaks open somewhere, and the dog's barks grow louder, and Abigail hears men's voices. A voice. There, in the garden! She can hear them running towards her, and she pushes herself up from the deep mud again, and her hands begin to slip again, and she falls back down, the stinking mud splashing her face so she cannot see. A hand reaches out to pull her up, but she misses it and falls back. Finally, with a hard push, she makes it to her knees, but she can find no firm ground to stand on. So she pushes forward through the thick muck on her knees until she is close enough to the edge to reach for Mr. Clark's waiting hands. His grip is strong and he pulls back hard. Abigail felt herself jerk forward and out of the mud, only to lose her balance again and land seated in a separate pile of compost that was waiting to be spread. She hears men laughing, and she felt herself blush as she tries to wipe the mud from her eyes. She seizes Mr. Clark's hands and held tight as he pulls her up again and helps her to find her balance. Mr. Clark laughing through his words. What in heaven? He peers closer, trying to see through the muck as Abigail endeavors futilely to wipe the mud off of her hands. Abigail Stuart, it's you! Mr. Clark laughs hard as he hands her a handkerchief the other gentleman gives him. Nathaniel Reynolds, sputtering through laughter. Don't worry, it's clean. He emphasizes the word clean. Angrily, Abby seizes the handkerchief and wipes her eyes to see, blinking. She looks up at the two men who are holding their stomachs and laughing too hard to speak. Abigail, internal monologue, her eyes wide. Oh, God, no, the gentleman of Mr. Clark is Nathaniel Reynolds. Mr. Clark, laughing and stuttering. Mr. Reynolds, may I express Miss Abigail Stuart? May I express? Hi, Nathaniel Reynolds, laughing but with good humor. Yes, I believe we've met. Mr. Clark, trying to apologize, stuttering. I'm so sorry. What in heaven were you doing? What were you trying to do? Abigail glares at both men. She is filthy and she stinks, and she is mortified. Internally, but I still have my dignity. They are behaving like fools. Abigail, aloud, defiantly, lifting her nose at Mr. Clark. I was taking a shortcut. Mr. Clark, incredibly. Through the hedge? Mr. Clark and Mr. Reynolds look at each other and explode again into fits of laughter. Abigail pursing her lips. Yes, through the hedge. Abigail starts to walk towards Minor Street. Abigail, internal dialogue. I must get back home, but walking around the block would take time, and worse still, people might see me. So it wouldn't go. I must go back home, but walking around the block would take time, and worse still, people might see me. No, it wouldn't do to go through the hedge a second time, especially with the men watching. Their laughter might kill them. Not that I would feel any guilt. I shall have to walk out to Minor Street and then around the block back home using 6th Street. It is not so built up. Perhaps no one will see me. Takes a few steps, then realizes that the mud has seeped into her shoes, making it painful to walk. Gripping a tree branch for balance, she slips her feet out of her shoes, picks them up, and begins to walk, the gentleman's laughter following behind. Mr. Clark in the distance. Actually, Miss Stuart is a very fetching young woman. He explodes with laughter. Nathaniel laughing ruefully. I shall have to take your word for it. Abigail feels herself blush. Stepping into Minor Street, Abigail turns towards 6th Street and walks as quickly as she can to the corner. The street is quiet and she hurries along it to Chestnut Street. There, she lifts her skirt slightly and runs the distance to the front gate, pretending not to notice the stares of passers-by who must have been startled by her stench as they were by her appearance. Slipping inside the yard, she hurries to the back door and pushes her way into the kitchen. Mrs. Fitsum is standing at the table.